And welcome back. We have some news that's just come across on a story that we've talked about, Andrew, and that is New Jersey and their troubled pension system.
A state judge has just ordered the governor and the state legislature to pay more than $1.5 billion into pensions for retired public workers. This was part of a deal in 2011 that the governor agreed to and then said that he would not fully fund according to those obligations. That's the finding of the judge. The response from Christie, from a spokesman, saying that liberal judicial activism is replacing its own judgment with the judgment or for the judgment of the people who are elected to make those decisions. Rich, obviously, we're going to hear
a shock. He didn't like the ruling.
We're going to hear a lot more out of this in New Jersey.
Yeah, we covered quite a bit on that train ride I had last week in D.C., and the pension shortfall is a huge issue. So it'll be very interesting.
And the state doesn't have the money.
No,
right now.
Definitely not. And as Andrew said, we're going to come back to that tomorrow. All right. Tonight, America, not just Jersey, but everywhere, they're faced with a fresh new threat from Al-Qaeda's affiliate, Al-Shabab. Now, the group, they're calling for attacks on shopping malls in the U.S., Great Britain, and Canada. The terror network specifically targeting America's biggest shopping center, that Minnesota's Mall of America. Authorities, they've beefed up police presence, and shoppers, they're being told to be vigilant, whatever that means. U.S. authorities are particularly concerned because Al-Shabab, they've been effective in recruiting Somali immigrants from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area to join its ranks.
Al-Shabab has never shown a capability to operate in a structured way in Western countries, but sympathizers of Al-Shabab have been involved in lone wolf attacks.
We're in a new phase now, and I'm afraid that this most recent video release reflects that. The reason I think we're all concerned about this is because it encourages independent actors who could strike with very little notice.
And if this sounds familiar in terms of this plot thread, it should, because in 2013, the Somali terror group took credit for an attack on that mall in Nairobi in Kenya that left 67 people dead. The threat, it comes as funding for the Department of Homeland Security is set to expire on Friday, and governors across the country, they're being told that their state will feel the impact if DHS is forced to shut down. And Senate Republicans, they're holding procedural votes on the measure that would fund Homeland Security and roll back the president's executive actions on immigration. Local lawmakers are already speaking out.
They'll all be asked, these federal employees, to report to duty, but they will not get paid, and are responsible for protecting us against drug dealers, manning our airport security, preparing for emergency responses, and terrorist attacks.
But again, this is something that we've been ready for. I mean, this is not something that comes out of the blue. Mall security is a main priority of every counterterrorism unit, certainly in New York, New Jersey, and Long Island.
The reality is America is stronger than any terrorist threat, and our communities are stronger, and we're going to go about our lives in the same way we always do. But just as New Yorkers were resilient after 9/11, we still remain vigilant.
Okay. Jeannie, this is the definition of rock in a hard place. Nobody wants to hear, especially with as cold as it is, and people, going to go to a mall here, that they have to worry about a terror attack from a group that's already had this as part of their game plan. That Republicans are going to shut down DHS. Now, of course, there's other politics involved, but for the general public out there, all they're going to hear is Republicans are putting your life at risk.
Yeah, but interestingly, that doesn't seem to have resonated with the American public to this point. And as you mentioned, the shutdown is coming in a matter of days. And yet we don't see, I think, as much of a reaction. I'm thinking about, for instance, as we think about the 3 young women in, Europe who went over the border. And, their efforts to recruit have been very successful with young people, particularly in Minneapolis, near these kinds of areas that they're talking about now. We really could face a threat, and yet, as you mentioned, we have this looming shutdown, and as far as I can tell, very little public, broad discussion about it.
But you know how it happens, Dom.
If
Once
there's one
Friday,
incident,
right? Once it comes to Friday, and this is the lead story, assuming something else of huge note isn't going on in the world, then all of a sudden, traffic's down at the mall because people, or even at the Palisades in Rockland where we were earlier today, or pick any of the bigger malls that are around here in our region, and who's going to get blamed? Republicans, because they cut off the funding for that.
I don't know about that, Richard. If I were this president, I would look back at the midterms when Democrats around the country didn't want him to come. Republicans have shown a great ability, whether they're wrong or not, to flip it on this president and the American people turn around and blame this president.
Every time they go to this playbook, Republicans lose. Remember what happened when we went off the fiscal cliff here? Remember with the shutdown and everything else?
But
they get blamed.
But who took the shellacking with the midterm election?
But we're not talking about the midterms. We just had them.
But what I'm saying is, they flip it, Richard. They're very good at flipping it.
I disagree, Andrew. I think every time they've tried to, they always lose.
For 3 seconds, let me just tell you the argument. We didn't want, this is what the Republicans are going to say. We didn't want to do this. The president forced our hand with immigration, and we're not going to let him dictate American policy on immigration. Which side do you think the American people are going to side? You think American people really want immigration with Latinos and others coming?
I'll answer the question. They had the same exact argument, changed the language around a little bit when it had to do with the government shutdown, okay? And what happened to them? By every metric, Boehner and the rest will tell you, they lost, and they lost big as a consequence. The only thing people are going to care about is, wait a minute, you're imperiling my safety because you don't like what the president did. And by the way, immigration polls well with the American public. Okay,
I don't know about that.
No, it does.
But Richard,
it's true.
But one, the federal agents still have to work, so nothing's really going to change. TSA, the federal law enforcement officers, they all have to go to work, whether or not they're being paid.
See, that's my point, as I don't think we're going to see much of a reaction until and unless the American public feels it. So like when the national parks are shut down, when people can't go visit monuments during the shutdown, people feel it. When people aren't working, they feel it, government workers. But yet in this case,
the record, Jeannie, is clear. Every time they've gone too far, they always lose.
But that's when it's felt. And my question is, are we really going to feel this? We're talking about national security.
God forbid something happens at a mall,
absolutely.
Jeannie.
Then we would feel it. But
Andrew, you know what the news does. What are we going to do? Everybody on Saturday, right, is going to go to try and file a piece at a mall, right, in every local market across the country to talk about the security or lack of. They're going to be looking for stuff to point out as to where things are going to be lax. I don't. And God forbid something happens.
I hate to split this baby, but you're all right. You're absolutely right that in the short term, the polls say the Republicans take the heat for all of these shutdowns when the government shut down or whenever we get close to these borders, to these cliffs. The problem is there's no lasting electoral impact, in which Dominic is right. Yes, Republicans took it on the chin in public opinion, but by the time the next election rolled around, it was less of an issue.
Why is it Richard and Dominic right?
And Jeannie's right in that Jeannie's right in that the public is sort of inured to all of this because it's like the boy who cried shutdown. We've had so many of these over the last few years that people hear it and they're like, they roll their eyes like, oh, this again.
One lunatic starts shooting in a mall here.
Oh, I agree with you, but I just always judge it by the students, and I can tell you, they feel like, oh yeah, whatever. It'll,
they don't even know I'm sure
something.
until Saturday happens and it's a story and then wait a minute, we don't got security.
If something happens,
if the
then
malls
people
have to
feel
close down,
I will be screaming.
People will be outraged.
We will take a quick commercial break. More FL on the other side.